The modern era Honda Africa Twin, it's been around since 2016. A couple of years after it was re-released, they did a few updates. It got a ride-by-wire throttle, and they also introduced a larger tanked adventure sports model. I think an incredibly successful bike. They sold almost 90,000 units worldwide in 3 years. But for 2020, it's received a ginormous update. Not that you would know it looking at it from the outside in. Stick with me and I'll share my thoughts with you.
These videos only happen because of the support and help from our sponsors. If you need insurance for your bike, go and check out Bike Devil. Support the companies that support us.
Now, in an ideal world, I would take a 2020 Africa Twin and flip it inside out so that you can see just how many changes Honda has made to this bike. It's substantial. An all-new frame, beefed up in some areas but with reduced rigidity in other areas, an all-new swing arm, a new subframe, all wrapped around a larger than before parallel twin motor that's now EU5 compliant, as well as adding a touch more power and a smidge more torque. Of course, I can't flip one inside out, and the subtlety of that design evolution visually when you're just looking at the thing means that it's probably quite hard for those of you that are comparing 2019 model to 2020. It's probably quite hard looking at the two to justify the extra expense. I don't know why, but on the launch I struggled to get my head around just how many bikes there are in the Africa Twin range. Months and months down the line, it's a lot easier for me to get my head around. There are 6 of them for you to choose from. The L is the base model. Then there's the Adventure Sports version, and then the Adventure Sports version with electronic suspension. That's 3. If you add then the transmission choices of a regular manual transmission or a DCT to each of those bikes, that's 6. The L variant is the kind of base spec model. It's the cheapest, it's the one with the smallest tank, and it's the one that's suited the most to predominantly off-road riding or entirely urban road riding. Now, it's the Adventure Sport with electronic suspension that we'll be talking about the most today. That's the bike that I've ridden the most. It is effectively the closest thing in price terms that we can compare to arguably the most successful and best-selling bike of the last 15 years. That's a BMW GS Adventure, in case you didn't know. So this 2020 bike is actually a touch shorter than the outgoing version. It's also slightly narrower across the frame. This is something that we saw happen with Ducati and the Multistrada Enduro a couple of years ago as well. I don't know if you can remember, but they found the first gen version was just too big, too tall, too wide for the majority of its customers. So they made things smaller and slightly easier to get at. Now, that doesn't mean that an Africa Twin will disappear up your ass, but the 50mm reduction in seat height, I think, will come in handy if you're looking for a curb at a set of traffic lights or you need to put a foot down on the side of a muddy hill somewhere. So that narrower standover, it might not mean anything to you now, but when you're stood over a bike that you're standing over, that's what standover means, it's important that you are comfortable, relaxed, and just generally confident with everything that you're doing. The fact that it is a little bit skinnier across the middle than the outgoing bike helps absolutely everywhere, not just slow speed maneuverability. This 2020 model gets a load of tech. It's all housed in this sweet looking 6.5-inch TFT dash. A dash that takes an age to boot up, simply too long. I find it hard to believe that Honda didn't benchmark simple things like how long that dash takes to boot up with its competitors. For me, I kind of picture the 3 things that the average tyre kicker is going to do in the average showroom. The first thing they're going to do is ping the clutch and nod appreciatively. The next thing they're going to do is jump on the bike and rock the forks with confidence. The final test is going to be flicking the ignition on and taking it all in. Now, in my opinion, Matey is going to have burnt up his entire lunch break waiting for that screen to load up. I just think it takes too long. If you're a green lane loving bank robber and you've got money on your mind, you're probably better off looking somewhere else, because this bike does not do quick getaways. Once it is on, however, it's a great system. You can select from any one of 4 power modes, 3 engine brake modes, 3 wheelie control modes, 7 levels of traction control, 8 if you choose to add turning it off. There is simply loads of stuff to play with. There's even more stuff to play with if you opt for this electronic suspension model that I'm riding. On top of all of that, there are 2 user modes, so you can tailor everything to suit, I'm guessing, an off-road riding scenario and an on-road riding scenario. There's Apple Play, there's Bluetooth connectivity to your headset, there's a USB for handy charging. They really have thought of everything, but the other downside to the entire system is you can't touch things and adjust them when you're on the fly. You can still adjust stuff with the controls, but you can't lean in and push anything once you're moving on this bike. So the optional extra is this Showa Electronically Equipped Ride Adjustment suspension, semi-active suspension basically. It offers 3 modes, and much like everything else, you can dial right into all of the settings. Think back to 5-blade, SP, and all those levels of adjustment. You can play with literally everything on this bike and set it exactly how you like. That suspension is also linked to the 6-axis IMU, which is linked to all of the other safety trinkets that I was talking about earlier on. Something that I was really pleased to see on this bike is conversation now between the amount of lean that you're carrying and the gear that you're in if you're on the DCT bike. Previously, it would just shift up regardless based on what the revs were doing. Now, revs are talking to lean, and it won't let you have a gear unless you reduce the lean. It really is clever stuff. Now, on the old one, I used to find a slightly vague feeling at the front end, particularly when I was making slow speed maneuvers around town and stuff. I used to put it down to the fact that it has long travel suspension and a 21-inch front wheel. The changes that Honda has made to this new bike kind of erased that feeling entirely, and I can only put it down to those structural changes to the chassis. The fact that there is increased rigidity in some areas and increased flexibility in others. I really enjoyed the feeling of connectivity between each wheel on this bike. Now, despite the EU5 emissions nonsense, I think the 100 horsepower that this bike makes is the perfect amount for it. It revs really willingly, it pulls all the way up through the rev range. And when you couple how easy it is to rev the bike out with that DCT, I was able to get into this kind of fluid riding rhythm with the bike. Connecting the dots between corners, thanks to the punch of the motor, was really easy and enjoyable. And I just got it. I liked the idea that the transmission was being taken care of by something else, and I was able to just look at the road, where I wanted to go, and judge how much throttle or brake I needed to put into the bike. Knowing what I know about riding 1250 GS BMW and Honda Africa Twin, I would say if you're in the market for a bike that works for 2, if pillions matter to you, I think, in fact, I would bet a pint that your pillion would choose going on the back of the Honda over the BMW. Everything's smoother, particularly with that DCT, and I think it's just a nicer place to be. We all know that made up as I'm going along phrase, happy pillion worth a million. I don't know what that means, but there's a 24 odd litre tank on the Adventure Sport model. That gives you an effective range of possibly 300 miles. They are big, long slogs to be doing 2 up, so you need to be happy and they need to be happy. Like I said, the Africa Twin has a 21-inch front wheel and an 18-inch rear. When you compare that to the GS, you've got 19 up front and 17 on one of those. I think the fact that it's got a slightly larger front wheel makes off-roading for willing victims like me slightly easier to get stuck into, particularly when you also consider traditional suspension, a fairly narrow gauge parallel twin motor rather than the boxer hanging out all over the place. I'm almost convinced that gifted mountain goats like Senor Christopher Northover would probably argue that the BMW is equally as capable, if not more capable, off-road than the Honda. But not everybody rides like Chris Northover off-road. We all love watching him, but can we all ride like him? I've spent the last 10 years proving that I definitely can't. I feel that I represent you guys a little bit more than he does, and I can tell you after riding both of these bikes off-road, I'm more comfortable and more confident on the Honda than I am the BMW. Our chance to ride off-road came in Sardinia, a beautiful place to ride whether you're on the dirt or not. We also got to follow Dave Thorpe, a 3 times 500cc motocross world champion from back in the day. A real treat for me, even though I am fairly miserable off-road and I don't particularly enjoy it. I was able to get away with a little skid here without worrying about the bike getting away from me there. This confidence that the bike instills in you is incredibly important when you consider A, it weighs 240 kilos, and B, it costs the thick end of £15,000. In my opinion, this 2020 bike is miles better than the 2019 version. It's clear to see if you look at the sales stats though, as I do because of my job, that the bike isn't selling as well as it could do. Now there's a couple of reasons for this. I think the first is possibly this kind of Emperor's New Clothes feeling from Honda, where they've looked at how far it's come from where it started in 2016. All of that work, all of that development, they've looked at it when they finished developing the thing and gone, that's the bike for us. But unfortunately for them, I think visually it doesn't shout that it's made enough of those changes to us potential customers. I think this bike could still benefit from a couple of tweaks. We're not talking about completely changing everything, just honing the ingredients to give us the perfect recipe. The first is the lack of adjustability on the fly for that screen, and the second is the amount of time that it takes for that screen just to load up. The final thing is as simple as it is complicated, and that's the absolute steam train success of the BMW GS. Honda can build the very best possible Africa Twin that you could ever imagine, but it still wouldn't be a GS, and there's nothing that they can do about that. Obviously, Honda can't change the BMW or the KTM or Ducati equivalents, but what they can do is build the best possible Africa Twin and hope that you at least give it the chance of a test ride before you make up your mind as to which one suits you.